My life, as I knew it, shattered on a Tuesday, not with a bang, but with the sickeningly silent thud of betrayal. A betrayal so profound it reconfigured the very landscape of my existence. I had found my father, Walter, entangled with my fiancée, Anna, in the sanctuary of our shared apartment. And now, in the twisted aftermath, they had the audacity to suggest I raise the child conceived in that crucible of deceit. The words claw at my throat even now, a bitter, undigested lump of disbelief. This isn't just a story to get off my chest, it's an exorcism. So prepare yourself. The currents here run deep and treacherous, Anna. Her name used to be a melody. We met when I was 24, a junior at Blackwood University, a place that prided itself on its ivy-covered prestige and the hushed rustle of old money. She was a sophomore, a year younger, but with an aura of knowing that both intrigued and slightly intimidated me. We didn't live in the same dorm, but a mutual friend, Sarah, insisted we'd hit it off during one of the university's curated social mixers, events designed to make us feel less like students and more like cogs in a well-oiled networking machine. I'd planned to skip it, content with a weekend of Call of Duty and blissful solitude, but Sarah, ever the orchestrator, had cajoled me with promises of free, albeit mediocre, wine. And there Anna was, not by the stale cheese platter or the wilting crudités, but standing slightly apart, observing the room with an amused detachment that mirrored my own. She had hair the color of spun moonlight, a cascade of blonde waves that seemed to catch every stray beam of light, and eyes the blue of a summer sky just after dawn. Her smile, when it finally turned my way, was a slow, deliberate unfolding, a charm that could disarm nations. We bonded over a shared disdain for the forced joviality and the surprisingly decent cookies someone's mother had clearly baked out of pity for the catering. I learned later she was a legacy admission, her family name etched into the university's donor plaques. My own background was comfortable, thanks to my grandfather, Arthur, but far from the stratosphere Anna's family seemed to inhabit. It didn't matter then. We found an easy rhythm, our conversations flowing from existential dread about post-graduation life to the merits of obscure indie bands. We lived relatively close, our respective family homes just a couple of towns apart, though hers was in the enclave of sprawling estates and mine in a more modest, tree-lined suburb. Those drives back during breaks, 3 hours of shared playlists and deepening confessions became the bedrock of our relationship. It's astonishing, the intimacy forged in the cocoon of a moving car, suspended between one life and another. After a year of these shared journeys, punctuated by laughter, late-night talks, and the slow, intoxicating burn of mutual attraction, we officially became a couple. We were both close to our families, or so I believed. It wasn't long before the inevitable introductions. I'd met Anna's parents briefly on a couple of occasions when picking her up. Her father, a quiet, almost stern man who'd made his fortune in bespoke construction for the ultra-rich, always seemed to be appraising me. Her mother, a former art curator with a gentle smile and impeccably styled silver hair, was warmer, though a certain polite reserve always lingered. They were decent people, I thought, if a little ensconced in their world of quiet opulence. Introducing Anna to my parents was a different affair. My mother, Eleanor, a woman whose life revolved around maintaining a veneer of suburban perfection, went into overdrive. She prepared a dinner that could have graced a magazine cover, complete with new, ridiculously expensive tablecloths and a floral centerpiece that looked like a small, well-manicured forest. My father, Walter, then 52, was excessively enthusiastic. He had a way about him, a practiced charm that I'd always found slightly cloying. He was a man who thrived on attention, a peacock in a world of sparrows, always regaling anyone within earshot with tales of his supposed glory days. I'd long known he had a penchant for flirting, a habit he indulged whenever Eleanor's attention was elsewhere. I'd always dismissed it as a harmless, if irritating, guy thing, a relic of a bygone era he couldn't quite shake off. But his reaction to Anna was different. It wasn't just flirting, it was a focused, almost predatory interest that made my skin crawl. "So, this is the enchantress who's finally captured my boy's heart, eh?" He'd boomed, his eyes lingering on Anna a moment too long. Eleanor shot him a look, a silent reprimand honed over 30 years of marriage, but said nothing. Our families generally navigated these initial encounters with a forced politeness, but I remember a distinct unease coiling in my gut. Anna was half his age, a beautiful, vibrant young woman. I pushed the thought away, attributing it to my general cynicism about my father. I moved on, burying the discomfort beneath the excitement of our burgeoning life together. After graduation, I returned to our hometown and landed a respectable, if unglamorous, job at a local manufacturing plant, a subsidiary of a larger corporation. The pay was decent, the benefits solid, and it felt like a responsible step into adulthood. I made a few decent colleagues, guys I'd occasionally grab a beer with after a long shift, a welcome respite from the grind. My father, meanwhile, continued to be the star of his own show at every family gathering. He'd parade his latest acquisitions, a new motorcycle he barely rode, a high-tech barbecue that intimidated everyone, some ill-advised piece of midlife crisis tech. He never missed a chance to recount with dramatic embellishments stories of his youth. "You should have seen me at your age, Liam," he'd declare, launching into a familiar and largely fictional account of how he'd almost become a professional athlete, a dream supposedly thwarted by an injury no one could recall him ever having. My friends, when they were subjected to these performances, would exchange amused glances, dubbing him the lost cause who still thought he had it. I used to seethe internally, but Eleanor, a seasoned veteran of his theatrics, knew precisely how to manage him with a well-timed eye roll or a subtle change of subject. Anna and I built a life. We moved into a modest apartment, a small two-bedroom that felt like a palace because it was ours. For 3 years it was our haven. Then, on a crisp autumn evening, I took her to the lake where we'd had our first proper non-university sanctioned date. The air was sharp with the scent of pine and damp earth, the water a sheet of polished obsidian reflecting the bruised purple and fiery orange of the sunset. There, with the sky bleeding color around us, I knelt on one knee, the velvet box in my trembling hand. She accepted with tears that shimmered like fallen stars in her eyes, her smile radiant enough to banish the encroaching twilight. We immediately threw ourselves into wedding planning, aiming for the following summer. We booked a charming vineyard venue, and her parents, to my surprise and relief, offered generous financial assistance. I was so engrossed in my 10-hour shifts at the factory, dreaming of our future, that I willfully ignored the subtle, insidious shifts in the dynamics around me. The red flags, in retrospect, fluttered like malevolent banners. Walter began calling Anna constantly. At first, I rationalized it as him trying to be a welcoming future father-in-law. He was ensuring she felt like part of the family, I told myself. But it grew stranger. He'd bypass me entirely, calling her directly if he needed something, even if it was a question about my schedule. I remember one evening, I was in the shower and her phone left on the nightstand rang. I answered it, expecting one of her friends. It was Walter, asking about a gift idea for Eleanor's upcoming birthday. When I mentioned it to Anna later, she reacted with an odd, almost flustered dismissal, quickly changing the subject to what I wanted for dinner. Then came the physical transformation. About 6 months before the wedding, Anna started going to the gym with an almost religious fervor. Before, it had been a sporadic activity with a friend. Now, it was a daily ritual. It became disproportionately important to her. She bought expensive, tight-fitting sportswear, items she'd never have considered before. She even dyed her already beautiful blonde hair a brighter, almost artificial shade, and began wearing makeup even on casual weekends at our apartment. One Saturday, watching her meticulously apply a full face of makeup just to lounge on the sofa, I joked, "Who are you trying to impress? Got a secret boyfriend?" She laughed, but it was a brittle, forced sound, and her eyes darted away. Her expression, for a fleeting second, was unreadable, but it sent a shiver down my spine. Something wasn't right. The most unsettling incident, the one that should have screamed a warning I couldn't ignore, happened one afternoon. I'd finished my workday early. We'd completed a large order ahead of schedule. I came home anticipating a quiet evening, only to find the apartment silent and the shower running, much earlier than her usual gym routine would dictate. I called out her name, but there was no answer. Maybe she can't hear me over the water, I mused, a knot of unease tightening in my stomach. When she finally emerged, wrapped in only a towel, her hair damp, she seemed genuinely startled, almost irritated, to see me. She quickly explained she'd gone to the gym after work to unwind, but I noticed her gym bag was still in the closet, untouched. The whole scenario felt off-kilter, a discordant note in the symphony of our life, but I let it slide, a decision I would come to regret with every fiber of my being. What bothered me most, however, was Anna's increasingly peculiar behavior around my father. In public, at family dinners, she'd make light, teasing jokes about his age, calling him old man or laughing at his thinning hairline. But when it was just the three of us, a strange tension would fill the room. She'd become oddly quiet, almost nervous, yet would laugh a little too loudly at his jokes, her eyes constantly seeking his, and she'd fuss with her hair whenever he was near. One Sunday, we were at my parents' house for dinner. I went into the kitchen to help Eleanor with the dishes. When I returned to the living room, I found Anna and Walter sitting uncomfortably close on the sofa, heads bent together, looking at something on his phone. The moment they saw me, they sprang apart, a guilty, almost comical haste in their movements. Walter hurriedly shoved his phone into his pocket, attempting to play it off with a booming, "Just showing Anna some pictures of the old family cabin, son. Thought you two might like to use it for a weekend getaway." His voice was a little too hearty, his smile a little too wide. I'd noticed the way he looked at Anna before, the lingering glances that weren't merely appreciative but possessive. It wasn't just a passing admiration. He watched her carefully, his gaze tracing her movements every time she bent down or crossed the room. At the time, I'd dismissed it as his usual slightly inappropriate self. I couldn't or wouldn't allow myself to imagine it would lead to such a cataclysmic outcome. Never, in the wildest, most fevered nightmares, did I think the woman I loved, the woman I was about to marry, could be involved with my own father, Walter. The man who had, in his own flawed way, taught me to fish on summer mornings, who had attended my high school soccer games, albeit often late and loudly opinionated, who had even, in a rare moment of generosity, helped me with the down payment on my first clunker of a car. He had become the most unexpected, the most devastating traitor in my life. The morning everything changed. The Tuesday that would forever be seared into my memory started with a deceptive normality. Anna had the day off. Her department had a 4-day workweek policy, so she was still asleep when I left. I woke at 5 for my 6 a.m. shift at the factory, where I worked on a massive, clanking stamping press. The day was a blur of routine and minor administrative frustrations. Around mid-morning, I realized I'd forgotten some crucial safety compliance documents for an afternoon meeting. I exchanged a few mundane texts with Anna, mundane messages that now seem laced with an unbearable irony, with no inkling of the abyss that was about to open beneath me. At noon, I dashed home to retrieve the papers, still blissfully unaware of the shadow of betrayal already engulfing my life. The 15-minute drive to our apartment was unremarkable, though I remember a fleeting sense of pride. We had bought this modest place, our first home, with money my grandfather Arthur had generously lent me for the down payment. Legally, the title was in my name, a detail that would later prove significant. As I pulled into our designated parking spot, something snagged my attention, a glint of silver that didn't belong, a silver Audi, identical to my father's. My heart began to hammer. It was his Audi. The distinctive, slightly faded scratch on the rear bumper, a memento from a minor parking lot skirmish, was unmistakable. A maelstrom of confusion and a sickening, growing unease filled me as I parked my own car and made my way to the building. Using my key, I let myself into our apartment. The silence was the first thing that struck me. Then, the scene unfolded like something from a surreal, low-budget horror film. Clothes, both men's and women's, were strewn across the floor, a damning trail leading from the entrance hall straight to our bedroom. My father's expensive, custom-tailored trousers, a silk shirt I recognized, Anna's lingerie. And there, carelessly discarded beside a pair of his loafers, was his wallet. I froze, my stomach churning, my mind a maelstrom of disbelief. "No," I whispered, the word a ragged breath. "This can't be happening." Instinct, or perhaps a desperate need for irrefutable proof, made me pull out my phone. My hands shook so violently I could barely operate the camera, but I started recording, my breath catching in my chest. I panned across the scattered clothes, zooming in on the wallet, the tie I'd given him for Christmas lying like a dead serpent. Then, with a growing sense of dread that was almost a physical pain, I picked up the discarded garments, each one a fresh stab of betrayal, and placed them in a neat, damning pile in the hallway, all while continuing to film. I walked towards the bedroom, each step heavy, the phone a cold, unblinking eye in my hand. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open. The scene that greeted me was horrifying, obscene. My father, in our bed, with her. Anna. In that instant, any lingering shred of doubt, any desperate hope for an innocent explanation, vaporized. The atmosphere in the room, already thick with illicit intimacy, turned electric, charged with my sudden, silent intrusion. The moment my father saw the phone, his eyes wide with panic, he lunged for the sheet, attempting to cover himself. He shouted, his voice a strangled bark, "What are you doing? Turn that off, right now!" Without a conscious thought, years of suppressed resentment, of minor slights and major disappointments, of a lifetime spent in the shadow of his overbearing personality, coalesced into a single, explosive moment. All the rage I hadn't known I possessed poured out of me. I don't remember a decision, only the impact. A hard, desperate blow that sent him crashing against the doorframe. Amidst the chaos, Anna barely seemed to register my presence. Her immediate, almost maternal concern was for him, not for the shattered remnants of our life, not for the betrayal that had just eviscerated our future. But somehow, a core of ice formed within me. After a few more seconds of recording their shocked, disheveled forms, I calmly turned off the bedroom light, plunging them into a dim, accusatory gloom, and walked out, leaving them to their shame. "You're no longer my father," I said, my voice a cold, flat thing I barely recognized. "You're dead to me. Go talk to Mom, because I will. Soon." Each word was a carefully placed stone building a wall between us, confirming the irreparable chasm that had just opened in my family. I turned and left without another word, without a backward glance. I grabbed the forgotten safety papers from the kitchen counter, the original purpose of my visit now a distant, almost ludicrous memory, and headed for the door. As I walked, my mind was a battlefield, torn between a white-hot fury and a numb, disbelieving grief. I reached my car, my hands shaking so uncontrollably I could barely grip the keys, let alone start the engine. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, trying to process the unprocessable. My phone, which I'd left in the car, began to buzz incessantly with messages. Dozens of them, all from Anna and Walter, begging me to come back, to talk. My father, in a text laced with a desperate, almost defiant bluster, demanded a man-to-man conversation. Without hesitation, I blocked both their numbers. The drive back to the factory was a blur. When I arrived, my supervisor, a kind, older man named Sal, took one look at my bloodied knuckles and ashen face and knew something was terribly wrong. "Liam, are you okay? You look like you've been through the ringer," he said, his voice gentle, pointing to the drops of blood I hadn't realized were on my neck from where my fist had connected. During my break, in the quiet of the deserted break room, I showed him the video. His reaction, a mixture of disbelief, disgust, and profound sympathy, confirmed what I already knew. What I had witnessed, what I had endured, was something irredeemably ugly. The rest of the workday passed in a haze. At 5 p.m. I left, a hollow shell of the man I'd been that morning, and returned to the apartment. I was uncertain, almost fearful of what I would find. To my profound, if somewhat bitter relief, the place was empty. There was no sign of Anna, no sign of Walter. Even the pile of clothes in the hallway had vanished, as though they were desperately trying to erase any evidence, any reminder of their transgression, perhaps hoping to avoid questions from the prying eyes of neighbors. I immediately stripped the bed, tossing the sheets, pillowcases, and bedspread into a garbage bag, as if trying to expunge their scent, their presence, from our home. My phone, which I'd reluctantly turned back on, kept ringing with calls and messages, including several from my mother. But the sheer magnitude of the betrayal, the crushing weight of it, had already settled deep in my heart. I didn't have the strength or the will to read any of those messages. I decided to collect all of Anna's belongings and leave them outside the door. I spent the next hour gathering her things: clothes, books, toiletries, the small, sentimental trinkets that had once symbolized our shared life. With each item I touched, each load I carried to the door, my anger, cold and sharp, grew. After nearly 6 years together, planning a wedding, talking about children, meticulously discussing the minutiae of our future, I had discovered she'd been cheating on me with my father. It was a devastating, soul-crushing blow. How long had this been going on? Since we started dating? Since we got engaged? Had she been talking about all this, laughing about it, behind my back? 6 years of my life, of my trust, of my love, wasted in the most painful, humiliating way imaginable. Technically, I couldn't legally kick her out of the house. The apartment was in my name, but she was a resident. But I knew she'd avoid any direct conflict. As long as I was there, she'd likely stay with a friend, or worse, at my parents' place. The thought of her seeking refuge there, in the very house where this betrayal had likely festered, made my stomach churn. Then, I remembered the ring, the engagement ring, the one I'd proposed to her with. It had been my grandmother's, a delicate vintage piece that my father had given me when I'd told him I planned to ask Anna to marry me. "Your grandmother would have loved for her to wear this," he'd said, his voice thick with what I'd mistaken for genuine emotion. Surely he had been excited about the idea of seeing her wear it, a constant, glittering reminder of their shared secret, while they entertained themselves in the shadows. What a grotesque, unforgivable disgrace. Without a second thought, I composed a terse message to Anna's parents. I informed them the wedding was canceled. They had always been kind to me, genuinely so, which made this all the more painful. Her father had helped me fix a persistent issue with my car last summer, spending an entire weekend patiently teaching me how to change the transmission fluid. Her mother used to send home care packages of cookies and leftovers every time we visited. They were good, decent people who didn't deserve this disaster, this shame their daughter had brought upon them. The message was blunt, brutal. "I'm sorry to inform you, but the wedding is canceled. Anna has been cheating on me with my father. I caught them together today. I've gathered all her things. I would appreciate it if you could come and pick them up." Almost immediately, her mother called. At first, she was defensive, her voice tight with disbelief, insisting there must be some mistake. But when I mentioned the video, a heavy silence descended. Then, a choked sob. She apologized profusely, her words tumbling out in a torrent of grief and shame, assuring me they had no idea, that they would come to pick up Anna's things right away. That same night, around 9, I heard a hesitant knock at the door. When I opened it, I found Anna's younger brother, his face pale and drawn, and her mother. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her face streaked with tears. She came up to me and without a word simply hugged me, a hug that conveyed more sorrow and apology than any words could. Then, she and her son quietly loaded the boxes and bags into their car. There was nothing more to say. The silence was a shroud. The next day, I tried, unsuccessfully, to contact my mother. Her phone went straight to voicemail. After another exhausting, soul-crushing day at work, I decided I had to see her in person. I drove to my parents' house, my mind a frantic rehearsal stage for the difficult, devastating conversation to come. How do you even begin to tell your mother that her husband, your father, is sleeping with your fiancée? There was no easy way, no gentle way to deliver such a blow. When I arrived, I sat in my car for a few minutes, trying to gather my composure. To my immense relief, my father's Audi wasn't in the driveway. I wasn't ready to face him yet, not without completely losing what little control I had left. But just as I was about to get out, my mother stormed out of the house, her face a mask of fury. At first, a wild, foolish hope flickered. Maybe she was glad to see me, ready to offer comfort. That hope was extinguished in an instant. Her face was flushed, her eyes blazing. Before I could even roll down the window fully, the torrent of shouting began. She hurled insults at me, calling me abusive, violent, a disgrace to the family, her voice cracking with a rage I'd never witnessed. She assured me, her words laced with venom, that she had raised me differently, that she couldn't believe what I'd become. I couldn't understand why she was attacking me until she, through choked sobs, explained. Apparently, my father, the master manipulator, had spun his own version of events. He'd gone to her the previous day after I'd caught them, and told her that Anna and I had had a terrible fight, that I'd been drunk, that I'd hit Anna, and that when he'd tried to protect her, I'd punched him too. The sheer, unmitigated nerve of him, cheating on my fiancée, betraying his son, and then painting me as the villain. I couldn't believe the depths of his depravity, but I had the video. He clearly thought I wouldn't have the guts to show it to anyone, especially not my mother. He was wrong. My mother, who had a lifetime of experience with his deceptions but had, for reasons I'll never understand, always sided with him, even when I was clearly in the right, reacted just as I'd feared she would. She slapped me, hard, across the face, the sting of it nothing compared to the sting of her words. She called me abusive, compared me to a violent ex-boyfriend she'd had in her youth, a man whose shadow had always haunted her. She told me she was ashamed to call me her son, that I needed psychological help, that I should turn myself in to the police. I was in complete, utter disbelief. To think that my own mother, the woman who had raised me, could believe, even for a second, that I was capable of assaulting my fiancée. That's when I snapped. The carefully constructed dam of my composure finally broke. "Mom!" I yelled, my voice raw with pain and fury. "Your precious husband, your Walter, is sleeping with my fiancée. That's why I hit him. That's the truth. If you don't believe me, I have the video." Her face went deathly pale. She took a shaky step back, her hand flying to her mouth, murmuring, What did you say?" I repeated, slowly, enunciating each word with a chilling calm. "Dad is sleeping with Anna. I caught them. In our bed. Yesterday. I have it recorded." She seemed reluctant, terrified even, to believe it. But I took out my phone and with trembling fingers played the video. I watched as her eyes, wide with horror, fixed on the screen. I don't know what was worse, seeing them together again, even on a tiny screen, or witnessing the utter devastation that washed over my mother's face as she finally, irrevocably, realized what her husband, the man she had spent 3 decades with, had done. When the video ended, she didn't turn off the bedroom light in my mind. She seemed to extinguish a light within herself. She put down the phone, her gaze fixed on me, no longer angry, but completely, utterly crushed, aged beyond her years in those few horrific minutes. "Mom," I started, my own anger momentarily eclipsed by a pang of sorrow for her, but she raised a trembling hand to stop me, her voice a mere whisper. "Leave, Liam, please. Just leave." So I did. As I walked away, the sound of her inconsolable sobs followed me. For a brief, fleeting moment, I felt a surge of pity for her. But after everything that had happened, after her instant, damning judgment of me, I knew it was time to sever those ties, to move on. That night, I checked into a cheap, anonymous motel, unable to face returning to the apartment, now a monument to betrayal. I needed time, space to process the cataclysm that had ripped through my life. I turned off my phone, unwilling, unable to deal with the inevitable calls or messages. The next morning, I called the landlord. Breaking the lease would cost 3 months' rent plus the deposit. A significant sum, but a small price to pay for my sanity, for a chance to escape that tainted place. I used some of the savings I had painstakingly set aside for the wedding, and in a rare act of self-care, I called in sick to work, the first time in 3 years. My boss, Sal, bless his understanding heart, didn't ask any questions and simply advised me to take all the time I needed. It was one of the few perks of being a consistently reliable, if now emotionally shattered employee. I found another, smaller apartment in a different part of town, signed the lease that same afternoon, and arranged for movers for the following week. When I finally, reluctantly, turned my phone back on, the sheer volume of notifications, missed calls, voicemails, texts, almost caused it to crash. I decided not to return any of them. I sent a single message to Sal, informing him I'd be back at work the next day, and then turned off my phone again, craving the silence. After several days of numb isolation, a cold, hard resolve began to set in. I realized I couldn't just let this go. My father, Walter, had to face the consequences of his actions. That's when I remembered my grandfather, Arthur. Arthur was a formidable figure, a man carved from granite and shrewdness. He was incredibly wealthy, his fortune built from the ground up in the rough-and-tumble world of construction during the 80s. He'd built half the commercial properties in the tri-state area before diversifying into lucrative real estate ventures. He lived in a sprawling lakefront mansion, collected antique cars with a passion, and was the very epitome of the self-made elderly millionaire. My father, being Arthur's only child, was set to inherit almost everything. My grandfather had been grooming him with diminishing hope for years to eventually take over the family business. However, everyone in our circle knew the real power, the final say, lay with Grandpa. My father, for all his bluster, was merely a beneficiary of the family name and fortune. What few people knew, a closely guarded family secret, was that Grandpa Arthur had ruthlessly cut off his own younger brother over 30 years ago after the brother had attempted to swindle him out of a significant portion of the company. Since that day, they hadn't spoken a word. My father used to joke with a nervous laugh that Grandpa held a grudge better than he held his liquor, but when it came to matters of inheritance and business, Walter always bowed and scraped before him. I called my grandfather. Without preamble, without beating around the bush, I told him everything that had happened. The affair, the discovery, the video, my mother's reaction. At first he was silent, a heavy, assessing quiet that I knew well. Then he asked me to send him the video. 5 minutes after I did, my phone rang. It was Grandpa Arthur. His voice was calm, dangerously so, but underscored with a steely tension as he asked, "Is this real, Liam?" "Yes, Grandpa," I confirmed, my own voice barely a whisper. There was another brief, loaded silence. Then he said, his tone immutable, "I will take care of this." 2 days later, while I was at work, meticulously concentrating on not losing a finger to the stamping press, my phone vibrated. I didn't normally check it during my shift, but an instinct, a premonition, made me glance at the screen. It was a message from my cousin, Matt. He was a member at the same exclusive country club where my grandfather held court, the kind of place with a championship golf course, pristine tennis courts, and a white tablecloth restaurant where a hamburger cost nearly $30. Matt's message was succinct. "Dude, you will not believe what just went down at the club. Call me when you can." I called him during my lunch break. Matt recounted the scene with a mixture of awe and disbelief. At the usual Tuesday breakfast gathering of the club's veterans, a group of powerful, influential old men where my father was always a conspicuous presence, Grandpa Arthur had walked in with his customary quiet dignity. He'd settled into his regular seat at the head of their large table, ordered his black coffee, and then, without warning, he'd stood up. In a firm, commanding voice that carried across the hushed dining room, he had announced, "Gentlemen, many of you know my son, Walter. As of this moment, he is disassociated from my company, my holdings, and all my business interests. He has betrayed this family in a way I cannot and will not forgive." The next words he spoke, Matt said, were delivered with an icy precision that sent a collective shiver through the room. "My son, Walter, slept with my grandson's fiancée. A man who can betray his own blood, his own son, in such a manner is not one I wish to represent my family name or my interests in any capacity." The room, Matt described, fell into a stunned absolute silence. My father's face, he said, drained of all color, becoming a ghastly shade of gray. After delivering this devastating pronouncement, Grandpa Arthur had calmly sat back down, picked up his coffee cup, and resumed his breakfast as if nothing extraordinary had happened. I was in complete disbelief, yet a grim satisfaction began to uncoil within me. My father, Walter, once the respected, if somewhat ostentatious figure in their social circle, was watching his carefully constructed reputation, his very identity, crumble to dust in front of the local elite. It felt like the public execution of his social and professional life. What happened next was nothing short of impressive in its brutal efficiency. Without stirring up a wider scandal, Grandpa, an old-school patriarch who detested public scenes but wielded his power with surgical precision, took absolute control of the situation. He summoned his phalanx of lawyers from Chicago. They spent 2 days rewriting Grandpa's extensive will and meticulously restructuring all the legal documents pertaining to his trusts and businesses. He had the locks changed on Walter's opulent office at the company headquarters and had his email, company credit cards, and all access cards immediately deactivated. My father found out the hard way. He'd apparently tried to use his club membership for a round of golf later that week, only to be politely but firmly informed by the manager that his membership had been revoked. The manager then handed him a terse, formally worded letter notifying him that, at Grandpa Arthur's explicit request, his privileges were permanently canceled. When Walter, undoubtedly fuming, had driven to the company headquarters, he discovered his office had been completely dismantled, his name already removed from the directory. 2 days after that, I received a call from him. I almost didn't answer, but a morbid curiosity, a need to hear the fallout, got the better of me, especially after everything that had transpired. He was clearly panicked, his usual bluster replaced by a desperate, whining tone. He begged me to talk to Grandpa, to intercede on his behalf, insisting he had made a terrible mistake, that it was an isolated incident, a moment of madness, and that he regretted it with all his heart. I listened in cold silence, then replied, my voice devoid of any emotion. Go to hell, Walter. I reminded him. You don't understand, do you? He's taking everything away from you. Your job, your memberships, your inheritance. He's even changing his will. His pathetic attempts to justify his behavior, to minimize his betrayal, were met with my unwavering silence. His actions were inexcusable. I ended the call and blocked his number again. The satisfaction I felt was a cold, hard, and undeniable thing. Finally, Walter was paying for what he had done. A week later, my mother called. Her voice was subdued, weary, but a new strength resonated in her tone. She informed me that Walter had moved out. She had kicked him out the day after she saw the video. The divorce papers, she added, had already been filed. I was immensely relieved to hear it, but then came the part that truly underscored Grandpa's foresight. It turned out that when my parents had married, all those years ago, Grandpa Arthur, ever the pragmatist, had insisted on a comprehensive prenuptial agreement, complete with a stringent infidelity clause. This meant that my father, Walter, would receive absolutely nothing from the marriage, not the house, not the cars, not a penny of the joint savings. Everything would remain with my mother. Grandpa always thinks ahead, I said, a genuine note of surprise and admiration in my voice. My mother added, with a sigh, that my father had moved in with his estranged brother, the one Grandpa had cut off. Though my uncle, understandably, wasn't thrilled about the situation, at least family, in some twisted form, was still family. So it seemed. In an attempt to bridge the chasm that had opened between us, to see the human side of her pain, I asked my mother how she felt. Her voice caught, and she confessed, her words barely a whisper. I'm surviving, Liam. 30 years of marriage, vanished in an instant. As for me, my life had indeed taken an unexpected, if painful, turn. But amidst the wreckage, green shoots of new beginnings were emerging. I received a promotion at the factory. I was now a floor supervisor, a role that came with a better salary, more manageable hours, and a new team that knew nothing of my family's sordid drama. I moved into my new apartment in a different part of town. Although the commute was longer, the change, the distance, was exactly what I needed to start fresh, to breathe again. My relationship with Grandpa Arthur also grew stronger, forged in the crucible of this shared ordeal. We saw each other regularly, and he became a quiet, steadfast source of support and wisdom. He even, in an act of profound kindness, gave me the money that would have been my wedding fund, instructing me to invest it in my future, to build something new for myself. At 25, my life was nothing like I had imagined it would be. The dreams I'd cherished with Anna had turned to ashes. But at least, I knew with a certainty that chilled and comforted me in equal measure, I wouldn't end up like my father. Life, it seemed, kept throwing its relentless curveballs. Since I discovered my father's betrayal and my ex-fiancée's involvement, the consequences have continued to ripple outwards. Walter has, for all intents and purposes, been banished from the city, his social standing obliterated. He lost his figurehead position as vice president, his coveted country club membership, and nearly all his supposed business friends. The divorce was finalized with a swift, brutal efficiency thanks to Grandpa's ironclad prenuptial agreement. He got nothing. No house, no cars, no access to the joint savings. The last I heard from a reluctant Matt, Walter was working the night shift at a 24-hour convenience store on the outskirts of town and living in a small, run-down studio apartment above a noisy bar. I saw him once from a distance, at a gas station last week. He looked like he had aged 20 years, his once-styled hair completely gray, his expensive suit replaced by a threadbare jacket, He looked utterly broken, a hollow man. He tried to catch my eye, to talk to me, but I just fueled my car and drove away. Maybe someday I'll find it in me to feel something other than cold disgust. But not now. Meanwhile, my mother sold the sprawling family house, a place now tainted with too many bitter memories, and bought a chic, modern condo downtown. We're trying, slowly, tentatively, to rebuild our relationship. It's been a slow, painful process. It still hurts, a deep, aching bruise. How quickly, how completely. She rushed to believe I was an abuser. How readily she accepted his lies over the truth of the son she raised. As for my ex, Anna, she ended up moving back in with her equally devastated parents. She keeps trying to contact me, leaving tearful voicemails and sending pleading texts through new, unblocked numbers, filled with flimsy excuses about how she made a terrible mistake, how she was confused, how Walter had manipulated her. Every time she does, I change my own number and block hers. Her betrayal was absolute. To compound the nightmare, 2 weeks ago, she called again, this time from a payphone, her voice choked with sobs. She confessed she was pregnant, and she didn't know if the baby was mine or my father's. I made it unequivocally clear to her that I would never take responsibility for raising a child who could be my half-sibling, a constant, living reminder of their treachery. I immediately blocked the payphone number, though I knew she'd find other ways. I warned her, through a curt message relayed by her brother, that if she persisted in harassing me, I would take legal action. With my new promotion, the change in hours, and the blessedly oblivious new team at work, I feel like I can finally begin to leave the suffocating weight of this family drama behind. Moving to the new apartment, despite the longer commute, represents the fresh start I so desperately needed. And above all, Grandpa Arthur continues to be my pillar, my anchor in this storm. He's a man of unwavering principle, possessed of a profound sense of justice that has helped me navigate this unimaginable crisis. His quiet support, along with the generous investment he made in what would have been my wedding fund, gives me a fragile but persistent hope for the future. At 25, my life is a landscape irrevocably altered, but at least I know, with a certainty that is both a burden and a strange kind of freedom, I won't end up like my father. I will build my own life, on my own terms, far from the ashes of their deceit.